today we're talking about trust. And it's a funny thing to talk about trust because really there are so many things that we don't trust and we can't really trust. You know, we can't really trust the weather. The weatherman will tell us one thing and then the other thing will show up, right? And we can't really trust the opinions of others because they continue to shift and change in the stock market, and the admiration of our friends seems to ebb and flow according to our actions. So really the only thing that we can trust is our relationship with God. And Mary has been known to call this relationship the river beneath the river, you know, to get beneath the forms. And we develop trust in moving beyond the world, you know, and getting into that river, the river that this river has become a code name for God. You know, the river beneath the river. So Gene Shepard, who wrote that movie, The Christmas Story. Has anybody seen The Christmas Story? It's such a great, not a finger. He says, in God we trust, all others pay cash. So that's a good code of ethic to go with. Like, in God we trust, but do we trust God? Trust is the tool that allows us to come to the edge. Trust is also not a very graceful thing. Trust is actually really, really, as we begin to develop trust, it's awkward. It's super awkward. It's that feeling that you get when you get into the car, the passenger seat, with a son or daughter who has their permit. And they stick the keys in the ignition, and you hear the car click on, and you begin that stop and start jerky thing, and you think, I'm going to die. You know, when you have that feeling, that visceral feeling of, oh my God, and it's that vibrant and audacious experience of trust. That's what it actually feels like in the beginning stages. So, sticking with the car scenario, sometimes we place our trust in places that are unworthy of our trust, and we end up in a total car wreck, you know, just a total wreck. But trust is this ever-flowing idea that continues to invite us back out onto the road, you know, to remind us that within us lives a phoenix that has multiple abilities to rise again from all of the wreckage and to have these resurrections. That's where we build our trust, to know that this isn't going to kill us, that this is where we rise. It says that when it's time for transformation, the phoenix actually builds its own funeral pyre. It sets its own nest, and then it sets itself on fire by clapping its wings together. Who would set themselves on fire and really destroy everything that brought them to that moment except for somebody who knows that better things wait on the horizon? And that's the message of the phoenix, that it will rise from the ashes. And it symbolizes a renewal and a resurrection. Like the sun, it continues to rise, and it's hard not to see the double entendre on Sunday morning when we're beneath the gates of our brother Jesus, who tells us about the resurrection. Like, this and so much more are you capable of. I will rise from this. You will rise from this. So sometimes this is something that we need to convince ourselves of, to really develop this own trust in ourselves, you know, that we can't trust the financials. We can't trust it says in the Course in Miracles that I am under no laws but God's. I mean, that's a really audacious thing to think of, that I'm under no laws of God but God's. And then when we think about that, we want to think, well, what is that one law of God that I'm under, that I can truly trust? And that's the law of love. That's a law of love. And with the law of love, it says all things are possible. And if we begin to cultivate an experience in that kind of trust, imagine what could be possible for us. So, the law will work to the degree that we trust it. And trust is easy when things are easy. You know, that kind of trust is really easy when things are easy. But when we begin to face adversity, that's really when we get to develop trust. So I had this experience a while ago when I was a little kid. My mom was sick, and I went to live with my cousins for a little bit. And I skid my knee really, really bad. It was one of those gory, flesh-tearing, horrendous things, and so bad and so painful that I didn't want to look at it. And I was in terrible pain. And my aunt, Helen, she took me into the kitchen. She propped me up on the counter, and she began to care for this wound. And she had no idea what this meant to me at the time. This type of thing was so natural to her because she was a nurse. And And in the world of nursing, actually the word nurse comes from the word nursing, to nurse someone. Or it stands for a woman who nurtures. It's a beautiful word. So her gestures were very gentle and compassionate, and they touched a place within me as a child that was wounded. It touched far beneath the wounds of my skin. It went right into the core of my thirst. This was a place that was feeling malnourished. All of us feel in some place in our lives a bit malnourished, you know? And so we have this place of malnourishment, and malnourishment leads to cravings and wants and desires and longings. And if these cravings and wants and desires and longings are not fulfilled, we begin to experience depression and isolation. So, if you can be the person who recognizes that call for love and show up in that way, that's a pretty audacious gift that you can give to the world. So she was standing there applying this thick salve, and then she came out with like the world's hugest Band-Aid. And I was like, whoa, like I had never seen a Band-Aid that big. Well, you know, her being a nurse, like she had all the bells and whistles, she had the tinctures and the tonics and the salves and the, you know, the Band-Aids were her business, you know what I mean? Like this was her thing. So, and in our home, like that's not how we rolled, you know? We were pretty much like suck it up and move on. And if it was like really bad, like it was like literally toilet tissue under the faucet, like here, just like wipe that up, you know? That's, you know, it's kind of rustic, but like my mom was sick at the time, so when somebody is really sick in the house, all of the other bumps and bruises get shoved to the back burner. And so there was no fancy salves. And there's nothing wrong with that type of rustic mode of healing. So we have that still today in our families. Like when there's an addict in the family, like everybody else gives their good so that person can be supported, and hopefully that investment works out for us. And sometimes it doesn't, and we just have to continue to, you know, but it affects the whole family. Let's be sure about that. So anyway, I learned an experience from this oversized Band-Aid. First of all, what I learned was that I loved the Band-Aid. I was like, oh, this Band-Aid is so beautiful. You know, I loved the way that it looked, you know what I mean? I loved the way that it felt. I loved the care that it represented, and it made me feel special. And I remember, like, anytime I met a new person, I was like, hey, I got a Band-Aid. You know, like, it was like a tattoo or something, you know? And kids still do that sometimes when you see them, and yet, you know, even in this love affair with the Band-Aid, all good things must end. And one day it came that the Band-Aid was like getting really gnarly and sandy and linty, and it was like peeling off and half on, and you know, and it had grown uglier than maybe the whole wound itself. And again, I was standing there with my aunt, and I was kind of peeling it. You know how you do, and it's like and you don't want to, and you just kind of sit there. And she sat beside me, and she said, you just need to rip it off, you know. She said, you know, it will be less painful if you just rip it off. And I thought, no way, because less painful is still pain, you know? Like, that didn't sell me on anything. I was like, are you kidding? I heard the word pain. Like, that's not going to happen. So she said, come here. And she moved to my side, and then with one clean and powerful and graceful movement, she took it off. If you've ever had anything waxed, it's like, and it was quick, and it was painful, and it was done, but I felt sideswiped. You know, I felt like, you know, where did that beautiful, gentle nurse go? You know, like, where's the salve, and where's the other, you know, and tears welled up, and I searched her face for, like, you know, why did you do that? And she said to me, now you need air and sunlight, and now the real healing is going to begin. And I didn't want my wound to be hanging out. Most of us don't want to expose our wounds, you know? We want to cover them up. And I thought my aunt had lost her mind, you know? Because I thought air and sunlight, that doesn't make any sense. They're not capable. I need more than that, you know? But after a few days with no Band-Aid, I saw what we see, you know, that she was right, that the healing was happening. And that I had to trust her, that I had to trust my body, that I had to trust the sun and the air, and that I had to trust the process of healing. And even though in my heart I thought this will never work, I am surely going to die of a scabbed knee. it began to work through trusting it, through just trusting it. And some of the work that many of us do here in working with other people is that kind of work, that we hold the space for other people to show us their soft spots and their fears and their wounds, and they or we trust each other enough to expose ourselves. And I don't mind telling you that when you do that, it's not that I'm healing you or that you're healing me. The healing actually happens when we have the courage to take the risk, to trust that we are safe enough to share. That's where the healing happens. Where we realize that when we begin to share, we're literally saying to ourselves, I've found a place where I'm safe enough to share. In that moment, we retrain our mind to the idea that the world is possibly a safe place, and that in this safe place, I can begin to trust this world. Last week, I was talking to you about the words of I love you and how we often think those are the 3 most beautiful words. And then we thought maybe that I trust you would be more beautiful, and maybe I free you would be more beautiful. And this week, I thought, 3 really beautiful words are, you're safe. You are safe. You can almost inhale that and exhale that and tell that to your own soul. I'm safe here. There's nothing to fear. God has me. God's competent hands have me. You could use that barometer of safety to decide if your relationships are trustworthy. In those places where you don't feel safe, there's broken trust. Trust is the foundation of everything. It's the bridge that's built between 2 people. And it's built very slowly. It's built 1 brick at a time, and sometimes it takes a while to build that bridge to the other person, but all of that effort is worth it because we are creatures that desire connection, like we learned in the survey, that we want to connect with each other. To be connected needs trust. We need to trust each other. So we take that risk to begin to trust each other. And we take 100, 1,000 small little risks, and we build this bridge to each other. And think about it. If you're in a relationship with somebody that you don't trust, you're not connected no matter how much time you spend together. Even if you spend every meal together, if you don't trust them, you're constantly weighing every action, every eye roll. You're sitting outside of a connection with them, and you're surveying the experience to see if it's actually safe for you to bring down the veil and be your authentic self. So true love is based on true trust. That's why this idea is so important, to begin to understand, how am I? What am I? And how am I in relationship with my own trust? We give someone else a glimpse when we're in a holy relationship. We give someone else a real glimpse. We let down the veil, and we give them a glimpse of our crazy. You know what I mean? And if they love us, they love our crazy, and even if and we trust that they're not going to use our crazy against us, and even if they begin to take our crazy out into the world and say, look at this guy, that their interpretation doesn't make us look worse. It actually makes us look more lovable. I think that's beautiful. I share a story in my show that if you come to it, and if you haven't come to it, what the fuck? Got 3 more days, man. Shucking and jiving over here. No, just kidding. I share a story that Will told me about Ryan, and I won't ruin it for you hoodlums who haven't come yet. But he about this story, and I remember when he told me this story, I never wanted to hear this story. I never wanted to share this story. And the other night, we were sitting in our living room laughing. I'm like, can you believe that story made it into the show? And that we're just laughing about it like it's no big thing. So it's interesting that in true love, even the most fearful nightmares can be transformed. When we trust each other. That's audacious. So it's life-giving to hold a person's stories, and to hold them and to share them and to know, that you're safe, that those stories are safe with you, that my stories are safe with you, and that trust, that it can rise from the ashes, and that even if we burn all the bridges between us, that trust between us can lift us even above the perceived bridges that we've built and take us into places that we didn't even know we could go with each other, because that's how audacious trust is. So, can I have grace in the face of sometimes these perceived crucifixions and these judgments and these eradications? Can I have grace in the idea that we're going to burn each other down and build each other up, or that life is going to burn us down and build us up, and that we're all in a certain degree on the path to our own healing, our own resurrection, and that we continue? It's a secular thing. Jesus shows us how he walked the world in his own crucifixion, and I think the interesting thing about that story is that never do you hear him saying, like, you guys are assholes, why are you doing this to me? Can you believe they're doing this to me? Like, I'm going to fight back. Like, that's not how he did it. He just took one step in grace. You know why? I have a feeling he had great trust in the end of the story. Like we talked about last week, I had a feeling that he, when you have great trust, you can walk through landmines with the smile of a conqueror. And not only can you, but you should. You should at least give yourself the opportunity to try that role on, at least one time in your life, to walk through your landmines with a smile of a conqueror. Like, this is not going to kill me. This is going to bring me to an even more audacious state. I can burn this nest down. I can clap my hands and set myself on fire, because there is a place within me that is unflammable. There's a place within me that burns with the audaciousness of Christ consciousness. To really know that. Sometimes these concepts that come to us we want to wrestle with them. So trust requires that we develop a little bit of acceptance, even when it seems like it's unacceptable. Like, this won't work for me. So we have to come and have a little bit of faith. Faith is one of the other characteristics of a good teacher of God, which we'll go into later on in the series. But it does all start with trust. No matter where you are on your path, or in your pain, or in your healing process, there's a possibility for you to demonstrate grace in all things. The river beneath the river will take you where the grace of God can keep you. And no matter what, you're held in this grace of God. And in the grace of God, if you really work on that this week, if you really question, what does it feel like to accept the grace of God, to walk like that in the world, but not of the world, to really say, what does it look like for me to walk in grace? I think that would be a really audacious question for us to ask ourselves and to ponder, and maybe even to step into. Because the grace of God is one thing, the one sure thing that is actually worthy of our trust. It has lifted the broken into places that we didn't think they could go. If you're in the 12-step program, you've seen this a million times, where you see a sorry old house plant come in that's dying, and then somehow this grace of God that lives between us begins to feed this broken soul, and they rise, and they're unrecognizable. That's an extreme example. But some people wear their brokenness and their healing on the surface of their skin. Maybe you don't. But there's a place within all of us that's calling for a greater resurrection, a greater vitality. And so how can we feed that place within us with the fresh water of greater possibility, and trust that we're not done yet, and that God's not done yet? And that's the word.